It's a real pleasure to be here. I was immediately taken by your text for this session, and particularly the sentence that goes, if so, how do pedagogies of repair relate to the changing, potentially transformative practices, pedagogies, and places of reading, translation? And I stopped there because it's in particular the thing that got me, because of what I happen to be working on at the moment, is the places of reading and translation. So it was that sense of space that was in. And believe it or not, the talk that I'm going to give now is linked to a project that I'm working on, which is about reimagining a literary education in the age of artificial intelligence. And it has to do with the thing that one of the things I think we need to do in maybe the humanities in general, but certainly in literary studies, is repair the intellectual damage that we've done to what it is to read. And that I think artificial intelligence forces that on us in a really engaging and interesting way. If I put it crudely, we've tried to automatize our students when they need to be creative readers. And so there's something else has to be done. And the foundations of our subject, in my view, are wrong. So that's where I'm starting from. But this is now going to sound completely tangential, but it just happens to be that it is embedded in places, and it's where we read, and it's how we think about reading, and so on and so forth. So we could talk about those other things later on. But I'm also extremely conscious of the fact that this is speed dating, and I need to get through this very, very fast. So I'm going to give you I've got some pictures, basically. And I think it connects with a lot of things that we're talking about. It is about a monument. So to take you through this in what I hope will be 5 to 6 minutes, what you're looking at the moment is a 2,000 square meter, 7-level building, opened in 1974, and it has a 1,000-seat theatre, a 200-seat cinema, as well as many art gallery spaces, conference facilities, and so on. It is not designed by, but it is modeled on the kind of monolithic modernist architecture of the American architect Louis Kahn of the 1950s. And there you can see some of his other buildings and Kahn himself. So that's what you're looking at. It's a huge arts center and cultural center. Perhaps the most important thing about the building, however, is, and certainly for my argument and my broader interest in it, is where it happens to be. So actually, I think that building is in Dhaka. By the way, a Louis Kahn building in Dhaka. So he was an American architect, but global. Anyway, this is modeled on Louis Kahn. So this building, one of the key things about it, it is located, as I hope you can see, it's called, and is still, though it's been open for debate since 2015, it's still called the 1820 Settlers Monument. But you can see that it is in the town now called Makanda since 2018. It used to be called Grahamstown in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. You can see that it is built on, I think we shouldn't forget, called Gunfire Hill. And the reason why it's called Gunfire Hill is there's an 1830s stone cannonade redoubt built by the British right next to it. So there's this hill, Gunfire Hill, with a fort and this monument on the same place. As I said, it's been a center for arts festivals, annual arts festivals, in fact, since 1974, and those are in fact still happening. And has the most recent one, very successful, I was told, has just happened as you can see from the dates. One of the things that most interests me, and this is what will link to what Moritz and Kathy were talking about, is that it is, like many of these monuments, full of inscriptions and texts of various kinds. And so I'll just take you through some of them very quickly, And then I've got some suggestions at the end. But the one thing I thought I would just add, so you can see that this is a wooden main sort of dedicatory identification plaque on the first floor. But what I thought I would quickly add is what the first, the text produced by the first publicity officer for it in 1974 wrote about it. And this is what she wrote. As the use of the building had to be related to the contributions made by the British pioneers, the main functions are designed to concentrate on perpetuating the heritage bequeathed by the 1820 settlers. What's that? The English language and the democratic traditions they brought with them. By means of an auditorium to be used mainly for English language festivals and a conference center that points to the democratic practice of debate and discussion. So it's just important to remember that that's being written in 1974 to promote the monument. Okay, so that's one of the things, those are some of the dedications that it's got. If we look at the text, which is like a lot of the things it's got, as we've seen, there's text that's built into the structure, that is integral to the structure. So this is about writing, having a certain kind of life, and this is going to open up some questions about Kathy's wonderfully uplifting characterization of poetry as only emancipatory. I have some doubts, which we can talk about. But here's not, well, it's a bit of poetry. It's from the King James Version of the Bible. It's John 10:10. It's around a fountain, which is, of course, also part of the symbolic apparatus. You can see other things to do with wood and the British flag around the fountain, but that all might have life and have it more abundantly is inscribed around the fountain. It's the parable of the Good Shepherd comes from that. And if you read that, we can talk about that at length. If you read that in context, I think it opens up all sorts of ways of reading that, which are not maybe what the people intended. If you go into the main foyer, just looking down onto that fountain and going to the main big entrance, which takes you to the Thousand-Seat Theatre, you're immediately confronted by two very concrete walls, one right in front of you and one along a stairwell, which have these quotations. One is from a man called Henry Dugmore, one of the settlers, and it's from his reminiscences as an Albany settler in 1870. And the inscription says, "We must take root and grow or die where we stand," from 1870. And the other text is from a poem by the Scottish abolitionist and free speech campaigner and journalist and poet Thomas Pringle, from a poem of his called The Immigrants, which goes like this, and it's the one that I'll just quickly focus on. Nor wild romance, nor pride allured me here. Duty and destiny with equal voice constrained my steps. I had no other choice. Something for Africa to do or say. Thomas Pringle, right in front of you as you walk in. Okay, these things are fascinating in context, and as you'll see, I think give plenty of thought for the future. One of the things that's might make us just hesitate about some of the things that you've heard so far is the way in which it's presented, the way in which the designers and people behind the project saw it is they certainly wanted and believed that this place could somehow be a space that would be disentangled from the brutal realities of 1970s apartheid South Africa. It would somehow float above this in some way and be a space for freedom of speech, democratic traditions, and so on and so forth. I think the two reasons, just very quickly, to be cautious about those claims, even in context. One is purely a coincidence. In 1974, this was opened. It was exactly at the same time that the Westminster British-derived Parliament system voted and enacted on the 1974 Publications Act, which ramped up apartheid censorship to another level, at least for a few years. So there was an unhappy coincidence in terms of British legacy working itself out within the entangled apartheid regime at that moment. But the other, and I think the most important thing, is that there were lots of, the arguments for this building went on for a decade. There were lots of issues about its funding and how it was going to be financed. But it ended up being 80% funded by the state. Why the state? And the state promoted it in this magazine called South African Panorama, which was a propaganda magazine for the apartheid state from 1956 to 1993. And it was distributed around the world, kind of thing you found in an embassy, kind of giving a glossy image of. So it was there. And I don't think it's too difficult to see why the state was so keen on this, because in fact, the people who were promoting it were promoting a racialized, ethnic, ethno-linguistic version of British English South Africans that was really replicating apartheid thinking almost exactly. So no surprise that the state had it. Anyway, what to do with this? I'm going to end with just take you to a couple of quick suggestions in terms of pedagogy. Very interesting to teach this building alongside Zoe Wickham's absolutely ingenious 2020 engagement with Thomas Pringle and his legacy called Still Life, which if you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. It's one of the most brilliantly thoughtful, uncompromising, and for everyone and any reader, engagement with a complex colonial past. The second thing that I would suggest is that it's of course not at all for me to say anything like this, but if I was fantasizing about what I would do to repair this building for the future, I've got two fantasy versions. One would be to enlist some graffiti artists to occasionally come and just spray paint new quotations and take down old ones and keep it moving. And the first one that I would suggest is that somebody comes along and writes, what kind of makeshift shelter is this? From Zoe Wickham's Still Life, and then also put the rather mordant thoughts from J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace. More and more, he is convinced that English is an unfit medium for the truth of South Africa. I would do that. So there'd be a kind of a movable thing. I would also then remove and put to the back of the building and archive in an interesting way that people could still go and see it, the Pringle and the Dugmore quotations, and I would replace them with two isiXhosa texts, one from the absolutely brilliant Mbongi performance poet David Yalimanisi, and we can talk about that, but I'll just end with what I think is definitely the text that I would argue for replacing the Pringle, is S.E.K. Mkai's absolutely extraordinary 1914, it's a composite work that is indescribable in what it is, but it includes a story. It's called Itiala Lamawele. It's about the lawsuit of the twins. And there's just this moment, and I'll just stop here, because just remember, this is 1914. What's happening, I'll read the English version. What's happening is these are the texts. What's happening is in 1914, Mkai is imagining the first messengers to the Xhosa clans and communities coming back and reporting having seen the British for the first time. So this is being focalized, and this is what a technique that Joyce was adding to the novel at the same time. It's being focalized through the eyes of those messengers. And this is what they say. They're talking about this tribe, the British. It comes from the sea. It is a tribe that looks as though it regularly attacks other tribes. Their language is so complicated, no one understands it. As for fighting, this is the bit that's extraordinary, they are powerful people who fight using the heavens. The heavens thunder once, smoke and fire explode, and then something falls in the distance. I'll end there.
So thank you very much for being here. I'm going to speak about a space as well, but in fact, as it happens, an imagined space. This is, as one newspaper very pithily called it, about a temple for a language. but I'll come to that. Just a few prefatory remarks on today's pedagogies of repair, today's theme, and what I'll be trying at least to bring to it. In this cycle of panel discussions and talks that we've been having on this theme, in Santiago, I spoke about repair as a site using the example of my classroom in India, where I teach a class, and where reservation policies have kicked in, have been there since independence, but have only been implemented properly in the last decade or so, and of how it divides my classroom down the middle into those who are coming from the reserved categories and those who are coming from the upper elite, university educated backgrounds, and how language divides them. Today's presentation is also about language, but in a completely unexpected context of how a particular activist, a Dalit activist, has imagined a language of repair. So my problem, actually, to start with, was in thinking, how does one think of sites of repair in the context of caste? Because that's what I'll be addressing here. Pat spoke in her introductory remarks about intergenerational trauma, and we've of course discussed over many sessions that reparation or reconciliation isn't enough. But in the context of caste, it really isn't enough also because of the time space continuum. It's something that has continued for thousands of years, social and cultural discrimination sanctioned by religion. So the work of repair here doesn't reference a historical wound. Apartheid, slavery, 1492, these can be imagined historically, whereas caste is something that references a continuous violence inflicted almost from a time before history was imagined. It's always been there. So here I wanted to talk about the work of repair in the context of caste, both in the wake of the legacies of harm done by discrimination over the centuries and in the here and now of continuing struggles for parity. I will come to what caste is and how it's experienced a little later in the presentation. It'll come up in the slides. But before I started, I just wanted to mention and flag that I am a little uncomfortable doing this. And this has nagged me throughout because I've been discussing what I will be talking about here, thinking about what to say. And I've always said to our group as we met over Zoom over the months that I think the most important and urgent thing to address in the context of the Indian subcontinent at least is the question of caste in the context of repair. But I am uncomfortable doing that. And I thought suddenly, actually sitting here this morning, that I should flag that and say something about it, because as a member of the upper castes, do I have a right to speak for those who have suffered the violence of being designated lower caste? It's a question asked of men doing feminism. Can someone outside of the race, caste, or gender suffering, or who have suffered, represent them, or even try to do that? It's a large question, and I think it can be asked of any one of us presenting here today. I thought, therefore, that one way of avoiding the question, not answering it, is to present the work of someone who is a part of the community, and his vision of repair, as you'll see in a moment, is unexpected, humorous, and this again is unusual. You don't think of humor very often when reflecting on the work of repair or on violence, trauma, all of that, and polemical. So this is Chandrabhan Prasad, born in 1958, educated at JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, now a writer, journalist, activist, and political commentator. And he has built, or wanted to build, a temple for a language. I just picked up on the quote that Peter used just now from Kudzia when you quoted him as saying in disgrace, English is an unfit medium for the truth of South Africa. And it immediately spoke to this because that is what Indian nationalists and anti-colonial writers have said for years. And that was the truth as understood by our parents and grandparents. And now suddenly here we are at a moment where this community, the Dalits, have just reversed everything and said, no, for us, English is a language of liberation. So how and why we'll see in a moment. So what I'll present here is not a monument, but a small structure that in fact was not allowed, Chandrabhan told me yesterday in a WhatsApp message, by the government to be built. So it doesn't exist. You have to imagine the temple, but what is there is the deity. So if we then come to the slides that I have. So this is basically, these are headlines. One is from a paper called The Hindu, the first one, sorry. And the second is from BBC News. One is from 2011, the other is from 2017. So the 2011 one, BBC News by Geeta Pandey, she headlines it, An English Goddess for India's Downtrodden. 6 years later, 2017, The Hindu, 2 weeks short of Ambedkar's birth anniversary, and I'll come to Ambedkar in a minute and tell you a little bit about that, sort of covers the same thing. So in the note that I have up there, the word consecrated is important. So in April 2010, a temple was consecrated to the English language in the village of Banka in Uttar Pradesh. It was, again, as I said, never built. So consecrated, yes. The deity was built, yes, but not the temple. There were objections from the government. There was something about private land. As you know, Peter has written about this in Artifacts of Writing, but it was never built. So this is the, oh, sorry, I need to do it on my computer. There, that's the deity. So the statue is all that exists. She's a small 2 feet tall bronze idol. She's called Angrezi Devi, which is Hindi for the goddess of English. Modeled after the Statue of Liberty, as you can see. And as it explains there, holds a pen in her right hand. And these words are italicized because this is what Chandrabhan said in his she holds a pen in her right hand, which shows she's literate. She's dressed well and sports a huge hat. So the dress, I'll come to again, is important. It's a symbol of defiance that she's rejecting the old traditional dress code. In her left hand, she holds a book, which is the Constitution of India, which gives Dalits equal rights. And she stands on top of a computer, because the computer is liberation, because computer means we will use English to rise up the ladder and become free forever. Now, what he doesn't mention is that there's a dharma chakra, the little wheel, on the base of what she stands on. That comes from the Indian national flag, which has a dharma chakra in its center, and I think it's important here because it also symbolizes and signifies gestures towards Buddhism, and Buddhism is important for the Dalit community because Ambedkar renounced Hinduism as being fundamentally unequal, converted to Buddhism, as did thousands of his followers. So many of the community are Buddhist. This is Chandrabhan Prasad with his little idol. This announcement was, and this is significant, made on October 25th, the birth anniversary of Lord Macaulay, who it is said, and I've argued wrongly, introduced the study of English in India. Now, I'm tired of this battle I've been fighting to point out that the first college that actually gave Indians a proper education in the English language was commissioned by Indians, funded by Indians, argued for by Indians in 1817. This was the Hindu College, long before Macaulay's. What Macaulay's law minute did was bring it into effect in law across government educational institutions. So that is a big, big step. But it was done in the context of Indians also asking for the English language for reasons very similar to the Dalit, understanding of English as a language of freedom as well, because they saw that that English would unlock doors for them. I mean, anyway, but that's a separate discussion really. To tell you a little bit about caste and what exactly it entails. Now, the word unclean was used in the BBC report. I'm just quoting it from there. A brief example from the life of B.R. Ambedkar, which is not up there. Over there, I've just put the facts. So B.R. Ambedkar, who I'll come to in a second, you'll see him in a second, was born into a Mahar Dalit caste. This is a community that belongs to Maharashtra in the west of India, who were treated as untouchables and subjected to socio-economic discrimination. The example is a famous one. Most Indians know it. Although they attended school, Ambedkar and other untouchable children were segregated and given little attention or help by teachers. Now, Ambedkar is in school around the early part of the 20th century. They were not allowed to sit inside the class. When they needed to drink water, someone from a higher caste had to pour that water from a height, as they were not allowed to touch either the water or the vessel that contained it. This is also true of the life of Meghnad Saha, one of the best-known physicists and scientists India has produced, who has similarly written in Calcutta now. So this is in the west of India, in Maharashtra, and Meghnad Saha, similar years, writes about his experience in Bengal, in Calcutta, not being allowed to touch the water pot kept for the Hindu students in the hostel he lived in, because his caste pollutes, his touch pollutes the water. He's not allowed to touch it. So that task of giving these lower caste children water was usually performed for the young Ambedkar by the school peon. And if the peon, so the peon is the orderly, the person who is looking after sort of the maintenance of the school. And if the peon was not available, then he had to go without water. He described the situation later in his writings as no peon, no water. He was also required to sit on a gunny sack, which he had to take home with him. So this is why I've put unclean over there, to give you a sense of the discrimination suffered in that time, perhaps even now in rural areas, by this community. Now, Ambedkar, just a little bit, and this I want to relate to what Chandrabhan flagged in relation to dress, and we'll come to that now. So beyond language, beyond letters, beyond the temple to the English language, which is conceived of as being liberating and free for. So the reason that the English language is the language of freedom, I should point out, which is why Chandrabhan has built the statue and wants to build the temple, is because he says, and of course, as all Dalits say, it is a language free of caste markers. So in the Indian languages, it is easy to identify people, even actually by their names also in some instances, but also the language is, the English language does not reference caste, because it's free of it. It's come from the outside. It doesn't have the centuries of, caste markings that attend to the Indic languages. So Ambedkar is always dressed in a suit, as you can see, all the images. He's the founding father of the Indian nation alongside Gandhi and Nehru, head of the committee that drafted the Constitution of Independent India, first law and justice minister in the cabinet of Nehru. He, as I just mentioned to you, became a Buddhist, and here you can see a picture of him and the various let me just shift that doesn't shift over there. So that's an actual photograph, and the rest are just representations. And I wanted to also, while searching for images to put up there, I wanted to put up two images of how the statue was vandalized, in one instance in Tamil Nadu in 2021, which is in southern India, and in another instance in Uttar Pradesh in March 2023, so just a few months ago. So this is a continuing battle, as you can see. The statues of Ambedkar are routinely vandalized, and then routinely there are protests, and it's an ongoing political struggle. Chandrabhan has spoken in defense of suit boot. They are shorn, he says again, of caste trappings, unlike the dhoti, langoti, or pagri. Now, the dhoti is what Indian men of the upper caste traditionally wore, and it sort of reaches beyond the knee to your calf. The langoti is what the lower castes were, and there are various instances of dress discrimination all across India. There are too many examples for me to give. He uses langoti because it's the short loin cloth, the kind of thing Mahatma Gandhi wore, because he didn't wear a proper dhoti, which came down to the calf. If you remember images of Gandhi, he wore the short langoti, which offended Winston Churchill so much. So that was deliberate, the use of the langoti. The pagri again, and this was unknown to me till now, actually. Apparently, so the pagri is the cloth you tie around your head, and it has a tail. And apparently the length of how much the cloth can go down was determined again by caste. You couldn't have a long sort of, ceremonial thing if you were of the lower caste. This is not something that I was aware of. I wanted to flag the fact, this moving beyond of the language of English to this term that he's coined. He just sent me this article last week when I asked him about whether the temple had been built. And this is something that appeared in the Times of India. And the phrase he's used here is Angrejiyat. It's a Hindi word. Angrejiyat basically means Englishness. So Englishness here now refers to dress. Dress is important. Again, as I've outlined the reasons why, because dress is not. So he's saying it's civilizational. Now this understanding of the English language, or even the English dress as liberating, as freedom, is completely overturns what Coetzee says in the context of South Africa, and what all nationalists and writers have said in the anti-colonial movement, that we need to return to our own language, so the pride lies in our own language and in our own assertion of our identity. So the Dalits have simply gone against that. This then is an image of a temporary structure that was put up in Goa by some people at an exhibition. We only have it from the tweet that Chandrabhan put up on Twitter. It's a makeshift temple. He said it's been dismantled now. But I wanted to put it up here, not so much for the quotations at the back, which must have been put up by the curators, but because I wanted you to notice how snazzily the curator is dressed. she's a complete contrast, isn't she, to Chandrabhan's sort of. And finally, at the end, to come to some of the children at Baka village at the inauguration of the temple that was never built in 2011, and to end with the words of somebody from that village who was quoted as basically saying, so this is somebody called Sarvesh Kumar, a laborer who was interviewed by the journalist who was there, and basically again asserting that without a knowledge of the English language, not only does the English language liberate because it's free of caste markers, but it basically gives, and this is true across class and caste, and in India, of course, it gives children a route out of the circumstances they find themselves mired in. So that's all that I wanted to present today. Thank you. Oh, I didn't turn it to the, I'm sorry. So these are the children. Oh, I thought, I kept doing it on my laptop. These are the children. These are the children. These are the children at the village. And that was Sarvesh Kumar, who I was quoting from the BBC News panel, who, so these are the occupations traditionally. Serving landlords, skinning dead animals, again considered unclean for upper caste Hindus, cleaning drains, raising pigs and buffaloes, and also very, again, something that apparently most municipal workers in India are from the lower caste, because again, cleaning out the latrines and the sewage and all of that is routinely assigned to the lower castes, because upper caste Hindus are they just won't touch it. It's unclean. So it's meant to be done by the unclean caste. So I wanted to highlight some of that because I thought many of us here, especially in Oxford, again, I thought may not be familiar with just the indignity of what being lower caste means traditionally in India. It's something that people might be unfamiliar with, and I thought they needed to, I needed to say something about that. Thank you.
I mean, the one thing I thought it was actually in response to Kathy, but it was also the earlier session, it was the question I had, is there's a way in which when we're talking about these sorts of topics, often the default rhetoric is visibility and invisibility. And of course that's part of the issue. But the thing that I always find the next move is almost the more vital one. And there's a sorry to quote Joyce because it is just the best way of formulating this. There's the ineluctable modality of the visible. So the issue is not just rendering what is invisible visible, but how the visibility is being done. And it's really, so that was the big, and it seemed to me everybody was touching on that in one way or another. So that's a whole epistemological question, but it's also I've stopped using the word literature and I've stopped using the word aesthetic because they're too burdened. But if we say, if you mean aesthetic in the original Greek sense of experiential, yes, it's the experiential, but it's actually why I particularly love that Nkai quotation, because it is looking at the gun and recognizing the ineluctable modality of the visible that he's recognizing in 1914 that Isikosa observers and speakers did not have the word gun, and he's raising that issue, I think. So it's not just a kind of a linguistic device. It's a really powerful question about the ineluctable modality of the visible, and that the issues that we're talking about, I think, become much more tense and complex because it involves language, thought, etc., etc.